want to thank all of you for sticking around. I saw the level of enthusiasm, people engaged in conversation. But I'm Carol Dahl. I'm Executive Director at the Lemelson Foundation, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the session on harnessing the power of invention. Just a comment for those of you who don't know the Lemelson Foundation, we are a private family foundation based in Portland, Oregon, and our founder was one of the most prolific independent U.S. inventors, and he knew the power of invention to have impact. And over the course of the morning, I know that innovation, technology, hopefully invention, has been mentioned a few times. We're going to explore it a bit deeper in this session. At the Lemelson Foundation, we were founded because our founders believe in the power of invention and had seen with their own eyes, based on the 600 inventions that Mr. Lemelson himself had created, the power of invention to transform lives and create a better future and tomorrow. So we focus on inspiring and educating a next generation of inventors, as well as helping to create an environment that will allow them to take their ideas and turn them into products with impact. We believe that while there's a lot of creativity that can be focused on a variety of different problems, that in fact one needs to focus on something we like to think of as impact inventing, which is saying to take invention and use it to have positive social impact, to do it in a way that is environmentally responsible, because we do need to change the way we relate to this planet, and then also that they need to become financially self-sustaining, because the best way we know for products to reach people is if they have a virtuous business cycle. So I was really excited when the organizers came and said, would you like to moderate this session with Manu Prakash? Because I think Manu is the embodiment of impact inventing. And you're going to hear why in just a couple of minutes. So Manu is assistant professor of bioengineering at Stanford University, and he's doing some very innovative things in a variety of fields. But today we're going to be here to talk about some work that he's been doing around creating low-cost yet high-impact technologies, inventions, that can actually change the way we think about addressing global health issues. But in addition, as a side product to that, and maybe even the more important product to this, is going to turn out to be the power of these tools to actually enable a next generation of inventors, innovators, scientists who will ask how they can be involved in solving problems for the future. So I was really excited with the opportunity today, and I think you're all going to enjoy this a lot. So I wanted to start by asking Manu the question of, tell us about these products, these inventions that you've created, and one in particular is a fold-your-own microscope that is only 50 cents and can basically be used and is being used around the world. Tell us a little bit about that project and maybe some of the other projects.
Thank you, Carol. I think maybe what I'll do is I'll take one step back, just one sentence about philosophy. I run a lab at Stanford, and the philosophy of the lab is we think about frugal science. So the context here is, what do we need to democratize science and scientific thinking? And then eventually there is a large class of tools that are needed to get to a point where you could bring that to a very broad range of people. So as an academic, it's, of course, I write papers and I sit in a corner. But one of the things that we think about is, how do you think early on about scale? And you prune out a lot of ideas where we cannot imagine scale on an immediate level. There is a lot of things that the lab does. We have been known to not have a focus sometimes. It's not a bad thing. But one of the contexts that we think about is connecting the types of tools that we make that connect science education and global health. And the microscope is one that people have heard of. These are instruments that we actually build in the lab now, where we figured out a manufacturing technique to build microscopes completely flat on a flat sheet of paper. You fold them together. If we have enough time, I'll fold one in front of you. It takes around 3 minutes or so. You put them together, but then eventually what you realize is a way to see the world that you are not seeing. At this very moment, touch any surface, you'll realize there is microscopic cosmos that we're just completely oblivious to. When we are out in the field and I'm trying to explain a colleague of mine in Cameroon who's helping me with the field study, that the reason that you get sick is because of germs that you can't see, this whole idea that we believe that germ theory is embedded in people, it was such a hard conversation to even have him believe that. So I think the types of tools that we care about inventing are not just, of course, you need them directly from a global health perspective, but also what changes people's perception about science as well. Because one of the challenges that I see, which was brought up early on in President Kim's comment also, was information is becoming available, and we should be really proud of that. But when I see as a scientist, information is getting cheap, but experience is getting very expensive. And so when you start thinking about context-dependent science training and who are the next generation of inventors, how do we bring experience to people? So that's why I deal a lot with physical objects. That's another aspect of the types of things we do.
Great. So, most people, when they go to bed at night, don't wake up in the morning and say, what we really need is a cardboard microscope. So what inspired you? Where does an inventor get their inspiration? And what made you feel enabled to actually go ahead and solve that?
I think I'm going to twist this question a little bit because you think of me as an inventor. I'll ask this in the room. Who in this room thinks that they are not an inventor? No, but that's the problem. That's exactly the problem. It's the fact that we're all problem solvers. You're brooming your house and the broom breaks. Of course you're going to fix it. And you just take that to an escalated level and you just become passionately curious about a problem. And then you have phenotypes where we're just curiously trying over and over again. So it's not a function of one idea sparks out. I mean, ideas are so cheap, frankly. In the end, you get hundreds and hundreds of ideas, and then you really put a constraint metric. From a context of microscopy, and especially from a context of global health, many tools that we think about scale. From microscopy, one of our perspectives was, how are we going to scale this tool to a very broad range of people? And then immediately, when you start thinking about putting those constraints of both cost and performance in place, there are only a few things left. And how you make newspaper and print newspaper is exactly almost the same way that we use that manufacturing technology to make the microscopes. So to me, it's not a moment. Of course, the moment appears when you're out in the field. I remember very distinctly, we were out in the field in Thailand, and there was a joke being floated around that the man with the key is missing, which I don't know if you've heard this joke before, is of course you can put some amount of infrastructure, but it's so precious that nobody wants to use it. So you will go to a healthcare center and you'll have this fancy machine sitting, but of course it has been locked and kept away. And that was one moment to realize that you become a good pilot by flying. You become a good microscopist by actually engaging in your physical material. And so that was very clear in terms of thinking about scale. We put the barrier. We're going to make an instrument that costs $1, and let's see what we can do.
So when I look at the instrument, and I've watched your TED Talk, and I've seen it in a variety of venues, and I look at it and I think, wow, it actually almost, like when I'm done with it, I could throw it in the compost pile, right? Mm-hmm. And how many of you have been out, in that back room in Africa where they open the door and they show you, wow, look, we have a CAT scanner, we have an X-ray scanner, never been used, doesn't work, doesn't function, nobody knows how to use it. That compost pile never goes away, right? Yours will, right? So how do you think about that? The choice of materials, the impact, the sustainability of the usage of the tool that you're creating?
So if you take a step back, one thing that we're trying to do is, when I say democratize science and democratize measurements, is not just the notion of it's a product or it's an instrument. It's not. It's a way of thinking. And then eventually, there is this feeling in science that you make a black box. And when that black box, a tiny bit thing is missing, of course, that's completely useless. You put it away. The types of things that we think about have to be modular to begin with. For example, for the instruments that we built and shipped around to people around the world, and one of the contexts on science education was that we never actually shipped a completely built microscope to begin with. They have to build the instrument, so they actually realize what goes wrong. The instrument that I was going to just show you today, I've had this for 2 years, and although when we designed it, of course, it was designed around that you incinerate and you throw away an instrument because it costs so little, but in the end, you don't have to. And I do a lot of field work in Africa. Even the glass slides don't get thrown away. You wash them up and you use them again. And it sort of brings this notion of if you don't design products, especially products that people are going to use, you're providing them a channel to think about it, and they really need to be modular and very open. So literally, if I was to show you all the parts, you would exactly know how it works.
Well, we're going to get a chance to see it in a moment and see how it works. But let me ask you first, you've alluded to a couple of times the work you're doing with getting this out as a tool also to inspire a next generation. So tell us a little bit more about how you think tools like this can inspire next generation of scientists, inventors, problem solvers.
So when we started the project, we were really focused on global health, and we still are. One of the key was to think about not one single instrument that takes care of all the diseases. We started actually building disease-specific instruments, because in the end, you want to know an answer to a specific thing. And so one thing that started happening, it was very, very clear early on that eventually what is very crucial is to make people curious. We were in Uganda. I really remember this taxi ride, and I was talking to this person, and I asked him, why did you become a taxi rider? He was a college graduate, fantastic, did something in science. But if you don't make them curious, who is going to be the next generation of healthcare workers to begin with? This is another thing that occurred when we were doing a clinical trial for schistosomiasis for this in Ghana, which is actually, a lot of kids get this disease. We went to a school and we lined everybody up and we were taking urine samples from them, and it occurred to us, of course, they should all be doing what we are doing, and we taught them microscopy, and they built the microscopes to begin with. And then a realization hit, is the fact that the parasites that we were looking for are actually environmentally present. You go into a water, you go into a rice field, that's where you get the parasites. The same thing occurred in Nigeria, where we had these kids, and for the first time they saw a mosquito feeding on their own blood. You take Scotch tape, you peel off the mosquito. Not only are you seeing how it bites you, but your own blood is inside the mosquito. And suddenly something clicks that, I should be sleeping under a bed net. So it's that set of experience led us to a very clear notion, which we have as a vision. It is an ambitious goal, but just like a pencil, we would like every single kid in the world to carry a microscope in their pocket. So I am never found without this thing, because I'm trying to propagate that idea. If I'm ever caught without a microscope, I'm in trouble. But that sort of starts to create this notion of how do we make people curious? If there was one thing that I could do, that's really what one of the focuses. Because eventually, if you solve that, you immediately realize curious people care about their surroundings, and they will stumble upon solutions.
Yeah.
And one thing that ended up happening is not knowing what this tool is good at, or dictating to people what this will be good at. We spent 6 months in the lab making 50,000 of them. Initially, we built the first 1,000 by hand, and we realized it's not going to scale. We built instruments in the lab. We made 50,000, and we made a call asking people, anybody who wants one, we'll give them away. There are organizations all the way from around 130 countries in the world. Our biggest cost was shipping. We were shipping to South Sudan for $12, an instrument that had the cost of $1, so it was cheaper than the postage. But then we started realizing what people started doing with the instrument was way beyond our imagination. There's a kid in Nigeria who's running a test to detect fake currency. It had never occurred to me that when you start printing fake things, you can detect them with microscopy. There's another pharmacist who's actually looking at fake drugs. That's another factor that we'd never thought of. There are farmers in the United States who are deploying these to test diseases for bees, and especially looking at mites. So next time you find a dead bee, pick it up, see how it died. And it sort of changes my perception of why we make tools to begin with.
Yeah.
So now it's we have shifted quite a lot in our thinking as well, is that if you make open-ended tools, you will enable a lot of people to leverage their power to really be able to take them in directions that you would never be able to.
So that's a big vision, right? The big vision of getting a microscope of this type in everybody's hands, every child's hands, but I assume everyone's hands, frankly, the farmer out in Iowa, too.
Everybody who's a child at heart.
Right,
yes.
right. But then also, you know, the global health tools that you're creating and making sure they actually reach places. So tell me a little bit, how easy is that? So you get a prototype, you think you've got an idea, you've got something you can show once on a stage, right? What does it take to go from that to actually getting something that's out there and reaches everybody physically?
I don't know. We're not there yet, very clearly. But the one thing I'll mention is, you know, it's easy to get a seed grant. It was 100K seed grants from the Gates Foundation that started us on this, and actually a 50K seed grant even before that got the idea going. We've been working on this for 3.5 years, and it's a lot in terms of when I feel comfortable that I can ship this envelope to anybody around the world, and so that's what the envelope actually looks like. But one of the things that starts to happen is how do you take, so there is clinical work that we're trying to do on an instrument like this, which is disease-based, and then there is the science education side. And eventually you start realizing that you have to build structures. It's that gap between going all the way from demonstration, and as an academic, you write a paper and you think you're done. That's absolutely not the case. To going all the way to a point where we're now starting to talk about, should we talk at a national level in a country to say, what happens if every single kid in this country was actually walking around a microscope? What evaluation agencies should be involved where education doesn't become about just information? Kids find questions that they're curious about, and then they will find the information. So it's a long road, and I think kind of just from a context of financially making that sustainable, it's, you know, people like you who'll figure this out, and we would be very open in terms of thinking about things. But one perspective is just not giving up and taking the long view.
Great. I'm going to ask you for a 1-minute answer, so I'm sure I leave time for you to demonstrate for us. 1-minute answer. You have a lot of people out here who care about moving this sort of field forward. What kind of advice would you give to them about how do they create that pipeline of more Manus, but also how do they also ensure that people like yourself have your great inventions reach people and have impact? Any advice to folks here?
So I'm going to use this punchline. I'm just a scientist. But I think not giving up on something becomes very valuable. I definitely see a lot in terms of, like even for an idea like this, it was easy enough to get going. But then eventually on a long road, when we say this is the vision that we care about and we would like to execute on this mission and vision, that starts to be very challenging because of the context of complexity of the world around us. So frankly, it starts to be that you would like to be able to take the long view and ask yourself, 5, 10 years from now, what is the change that we want to see in the world, and stick to that. And I feel many a times I see that vision being lost because quickly there is a fantastic thing. The moment you start taking it to the next scale, you're finding a niche application, and then you get stuck in it. And then the second view of this is, I think investing in curiosity is probably the most important investment in my mind, because I've had enough experiences out in the field. Just my own story is the fact that those people, if you cannot make them passionate about solving their problems, and if you cannot make it so visceral as an experience, then it's very hard to just layer a solution and think it's going to work, because solution is a systems thing, and it would never pan out. So I think that's why we spend a lot of time in thinking really about what are the tools we're giving the next generation as well.
Terrific answers, a lot for people to chew on, but now the moment you're all waiting for. Manu, take it away.
All right, so I have 2 minutes, so I can't fold the microscope.
No, you need to do it. We're gonna cheat and steal in a minute or two. I know we can.
So this is what the instrument actually looks like. I'll probably just connect. This is what the packet that we've been shipping. We built 50,000 of these. You open it up, and you get a whole bunch of little things written in, but literally, this is one sheet that starts to, you fold it together and you get an instrument like that. These take standard slides, which was very important to us when we were starting to think about both diagnostics, but also what already exists as infrastructure in the world itself. One important criteria in building this were we were making instruments that are very robust, but also independent in itself. So this in itself is actually a completely independent instrument. I could use it many different ways. I'm just going to put a slide. I actually have a sample of Loa Loa. It's a microfilaria that you would diagnose actually out in the field. So at this point, to get to here, I'm just going to puncture my finger, which I don't have to do here, smear it, and this is just a 30-second GIMSA stain. And either you are imaging directly or it couples. So either I'm looking directly or it couples to an instrument. If I want to share the screen. We built another instrument that is designed as a projector that was really designed for teaching healthcare workers, because we had a lot of experience in realizing that people had no experience before of actually playing with an instrument, and you cannot have a conversation around an instrument. So there was a lot of instruments that we designed that were specifically for teaching and training purposes, but sort of for the moment, what I'll do is I'll try to connect this to see if something shows on the screen, and if we're able to connect my phone, we should be in business.
Everything on the floor.
Okay, so let's see if I can get my screen on here. Everything else should be easy. It's fine. It's that's the nice thing about making optics out of stuff that can fall off the table. So, okay, I see. So you're just on that screen. What I'm going to do here is just mount a coupler right here. These are the types of couplers that connect an instrument to any of our... I'm going to leave that here. And at this point, I'm already doing microscopy, and I'm actually looking for Loa Loa. So we'll just try doing this live. As you all know, live demos are always tricky. So at this point, my tape has run out, and I'm going to try it one more time to make sure that my tape hangs up here. Okay, I have to do one quick thing. This is also an important part of having you realize this is what tinkering is all about. So we're going to remove the cover. That was not in the plan. Anyway, that's my wife when she was 6 years old. She loves cake, and she's probably watching, so she knows I implanted this. Okay, we're going to try this one more time. I think I've overused this little piece of tape. Okay. Seemingly the gain, oh, there we go. So this is a blood smear. I'm playing around with it. I'm going to find, I'll show you when. So right there is one worm, and right in the middle, the deep blue lines that you would see. This is a blood smear. Right there is another one. I'm going to zoom into that just so you actually see the structure. Tell me when you see a deep blue line.
Oh, yeah.
right there. I can't see the screen. So one of the things that starts to happen is, either an instrument like this or the projection microscopes we make, a big thing that we found was we actually took the course that teaches you microscopy, and the fascinating thing was none of the microscopes we were being trained on were working to begin with. And so there is this notion of sharing. You saw exactly what I saw. So there is that moment you can point out and say, look, this is what you were actually looking for. So one thing that ends up happening with tools in the design side is if you make the experience a very shared experience, then there is no question about training, because this is an instrument that they take home. They live, breathe, eat with this. If you're at a dinner table, you say, what is potato made out of? You peel that up, and that's how you learn how to become a good microscopist. So there's a lot that we deal with, which we call, really what we're trying to do is build human capital. And you have to build human capital by letting go of the tool and let them really play with it.
Great. I want to thank Manu for an exciting conversation, and also for having the brave task of standing up here and demonstrating it.